There's three things that are vital to the few controlling the many. One is to keep the many in ignorance of what they're doing. That is now being put right by the alternative media and the communication of this information. A second one is the population being kept in acquiescence to the few. We need to come together and have a mass, non-violent, non-cooperation campaign the world over in which we refuse to cooperate with our own enslavement. And there's the third thing they absolutely desperately want. And that is divide and rule. We divided as a world on the manufactured fault lines of religion and culture and race and income bracket. They're picking each section off while the other one looks the other way and says, it's not my problem. It's not my problem. Well, a man said something like this after the Nazi years in Germany. First they came for the Jews and I was not a Jew, so I did nothing. Then they came for the communists. I was not a communist, so I did nothing. Then they came for the trade unionists. I was not a trade unionist, so I did nothing. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. That is what they're doing now. Oh, it's the Muslims. Let's demonize the Muslims. Demonize the poor. Let's demonize everyone. Turn the rest of them against them, and when the demonized ones have been picked off, then we'll come for you. This is what is happening, and we need to come together. We are all one consciousness, having different experiences. You can have revolutions, and history is littered with them, where violent revolutions remove a tyranny and what follows is another form of tyranny. You do not create a peaceful society, a loving society, a caring society, and a just society with violence. We are the power in everyone. We are the dance of the moon and the sun. We are the hope that will never hide. We are the turning of the tide. And so we are. We can do this peacefully. And we have the numbers.
One of the most clandestine gatherings in the world seems to be lifting the veils of secrecy. The Bilderberg Group is famously shy of press attention, but this year its annual confab is inundated with reporters from some of the world's top media outlets. Artie Sarah Firth went to Watford near London to try and find out what the world's most powerful group might be talking about.
Welcome to Bilderberg 2013. It's the gathering of world leaders and it's taking place here in Watford in the UK. It's at the exclusive hotel you can see about a quarter of a mile in the distance there, and perhaps not the most glamorous of locations for the 140 delegates who are expected to attend. Among them, some big names. We've got the Chancellor, George Osborne. We've got his Labour counterpart, Ed Balls, as well as the former US Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. We've got the former head of the CIA, David Petraeus. Not, of course, to forget the heads of Google and Amazon and BP and Goldman Sachs, and you get the idea. Now, delegates famously don't disclose details of what happens behind closed doors and what's discussed, fueling the conspiracy theories that behind those doors are plots for world domination.
Hello and welcome to this edition of TZM Global Radio. I'm your host for today, James Phillips, from the UK chapter of the Zeitgeist Movement and TZM Education. Hope you're all doing well out there, guys. Very strange goings on in Watford, my hometown, this week. We had a little visit from some rather high-profile people, you might have heard of them, called the Bilderberg Group. I must say it did strike me as completely bizarre when a friend phoned me up from the movement and said, do you want to put up some of my friends who are coming over from America for the conference of the Bilderberg Group? And I said, what? And he said, yeah, the Bilderberg Group are coming to Watford. I thought, wow, really? It's bizarre. But yeah, nonetheless, the Bilderbergers did land in my backyard of Watford. I thought I'd go and pay them a visit. Well, actually, I got the times mixed up and my weekend got busy and it all ran away from me. And at the times I turned up, I didn't actually get to the rally. But I did meet some of the people outside. So, unfortunately, I missed a few rants from Alex Jones. Though I did happen to watch Alex's performance on one of our top political debating shows over here on the BBC, in which Alex was a guest, apparently, although he didn't behave like one, shouting over the top of anybody else who wished to make a point at any stage in the interview, culminating in him shouting to such a degree that the host of the show said, "You are the worst guest I have ever had on my show. You're an idiot." And as Alex screamed over him as he tried to talk his way out of the interview, he made signs of basically towards the camera of him being a lunatic. It doesn't matter what you're saying at that point, almost. You just come across as crazy. They add to the conspiracy theory label crazy. A crazy conspiracy theorist. And then people go, and anybody who thinks anything alternative to the mainstream view is therefore a crazy conspiracy theorist. I don't think it does the skeptic or truth movement any favours to have that sort of representation. Not that we can choose. I just don't think it does us many favours when Alex goes off into one of those moments. I think he should just pick and choose his moments. You know, rant on your own show, but when you're a guest on another one, give out good information, give others time to talk so that you look like a credible source for that information. It seems to me to be common sense, but this is of course just my opinion. I was planning on going up to Alex Jones with the Zeitgeist Movement leaflet and saying, "Hey, Alex, you heard of this?" Or saying, "So when are you going to get Peter Joseph back on your show?" Heaven forbid he should wish to give us a platform on which to launch our new re-education program for our communist utopia. If you, by any chance, don't know what I'm talking about, then please do search on YouTube Alex Jones's interview on InfoWars with Peter Joseph to see exactly what I'm talking about there. Look, he and others have brought Bilderberg to the front line, where the mainstream media can't just ignore them anymore, and that can only be a good thing. And what it forced the mainstream media to do is to say that this meeting does exist, that it's going on, that these are the members attending that meeting, and the details of what they are discussing is not going to be disclosed to the public. Of course, many people will project into what has been discussed in the past and what will be discussed now, but you don't need to go down that road. All you need to do is say, if your system were what it says it is, an open and transparent democracy in which your leaders represent you, then you shouldn't have to even ask for them to disclose what they're talking about. They just would. Because there's nothing untoward going on. So why wouldn't they just disclose it? It's just more evidence of a system that does not work. Why get frustrated at it? You should not expect any different from a system that intrinsically rewards self-preservation, self-maximization, and monopolistic collusion. It is naive to think that these effects would not be the outcome of a system based explicitly on that. So, do you have an alternative system to offer in its place? That is the critical question I took down there, and invariably most of the time the answer I got was no, not really. I just know that this needs to be exposed, was the conversation I had. And I said, yes, it does need to be exposed. I agree, and you're doing good work at doing that. But you also need to have an alternative that doesn't produce these effects. And that's how we got onto the conversation. In my other research for this show, I watched David Icke's talk from Bilderberg, excerpts of which I used to open today's show, not because I agree with everything David Icke says, but in this particular talk, he did say some things that resonate very well with us in the Zeitgeist Movement. We are one people sharing one planet, and we need to realise that we are the many and that the people who control things are the few, and that if we want a more peaceful world, we must engage in non-violent non-participation in this system. That's a very simple message that everybody can engage with, and I do think that's where David Icke and others strike a chord. And all that needs to be added to that message is the statement, and it's the system that produced these effects. So if you don't want these effects, you need a new system. Do we have a new system to offer? Yes, we do. It's called a resource-based economy. In other news, I did a joint event with a friend of mine, John Webster, who's a documentary filmmaker who's about to make a film called Straw Man, The Nature of the Cage, to do with the subject of legal fiction. Not something the Zeitgeist Movement subscribes to as a solution set for the many problems we face in society, of course. But nonetheless, it was an interesting talk and an interesting event. My talk came from the perspective of using the Matrix films, the Matrix trilogy, as an allegory for seeing the way the world really is and how it really works. So I'll look forward to including that on a future show when that's edited. Previously to that, I did an event with the London Futurists and David Wood. That's still being edited as well and will be included on a future show. But what I've slowly come to realise is that if I'm going to do these monthly events collaborating with each speaker that was at ZDAY, that essentially what I am engaging in is a 9-month lecture series, because I didn't have enough stuff to do already. At some point I will include the audio from those events in my radio shows. But before then, I want to include the audio of the talks given at London ZDAY 2013. So the next one in this series is a talk by Sean Bain of the Equality Trust. So, without further ado, I'm going to include that for you now. So, this is Sean Bain of the Equality Trust at London ZDAY 2013.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting us. I'm slightly worried about information overload, as there's been a hell of a lot of information given out already, and I'm going to do a lot of the same, which is a lot of slides and information. What I want to try to do, though, is to go through it fairly quickly, fairly fast, because I think one of the interesting things that's come out of this, I think somebody asked of the speaker before last, is what next? What do we do? And there were obviously potential disagreements about how do we get to what I would describe as the very idealistic position that came out of the first talk, as opposed to the banking discussion, which was a bit more about reforms of where we're at the moment, to me talking again about reforms about where we're at the moment. And I think that's a very interesting debate that we might have, although we may not have very much time for it now. What I want to talk about is income inequality. And by income inequality, I'm talking about income inequality in the advanced economies of the world. And what this shows is looking at how much richer are the richest 20% in each country than the poorest 20%. Okay, so this is actually about income inequality. It's not about wealth. Wealth is a whole different issue and a whole different ballgame. And you can see here that you vary from the most equal country of the advanced countries, which is Japan, where the ratio is 3.4, right up to the US and Singapore at 8.5 and 9.7. And you can see that the UK, as you might expect, is right up one end of the scale. And what's been happening, although this only takes us up to 2005 and 6, is not a lot has changed then, is that, as you might expect, again, inequality increased dramatically in the 1980s with the Conservative government in the 1980s, and in the 1990s and the 2000s, the Labour government didn't make much difference to that. They poured a lot of money into public services, but they didn't actually make a lot of difference to income inequality. And the same trends are exactly there in the US with the increase in the Reagan and Bush years. So if we have all that inequality, that income inequality, if that income inequality has been increasing, what are the consequences of that? And in a sense, the terms of the debate I put into three. One is it's a straightforward moral debate. Is it right that certain people, for certain functions that they perform in society, get paid so much more than other people? So there's a straightforward moral question, which I suspect everybody in the room here will agree with, that the system we have at the moment is morally wrong. There are then economic consequences, and in fact we had that from the speaker on the banking system. I'm just going to say something very briefly about that. But we also have a whole series of stuff which is around the consequences of inequality. What happens to societies that become more unequal? And that's what I'm going to be mainly talking about today. So some of the stuff about the economic stuff is what we've heard already, in the sense that over the period of time where inequality has been increasing, the amount of money going to people on salaries and wages has decreased. The amount of money going to the top 10% has increased. And what actually happens then is that economically, the people who actually spend the money are the people on the salary, the wages, and the poor. And they've been making up, obviously, a lot of that gap in terms of debt and managing to survive in terms of increased debt. And the people at the top who have the money, there's only a limited amount of luxury yachts and so on that you can actually buy. If you have a lot of money, so what they tend to do is they either save it or they gamble with it. And then you actually then get increased financial instability in the system. And what's very interesting is that the 1930s depression came about after a period of increasing inequality. We then had the war, we were all in it together, a period of much more equality. Then from the 1980s onwards, increased inequality, another financial crisis. So actually, although what I want to talk about mostly is about what the consequences of that inequality is, it actually makes no economic sense whatsoever to have this system as well. So, and this is one example of the excessive pay inequality. In 1999, the chief executives of FTSE 100 companies were paid 69 times average pay. By 2009, that had got up to 145 times average pay. And interestingly enough, one of the things I'd hoped to be able to bring along today, which I think would have fitted in here, is that in the London group, we're at the moment just receiving delivery on Monday of a 5-meter high inflatable giant. And the 5-meter high inflatable giant represents the average income of a FTSE 100 chief executive. And against that, we have a number of little figures, which are like this, which are about what normal people, bus drivers and all the rest of it. So what we're going to actually be doing is taking that out into public spaces in London to actually demonstrate very, very graphically what inequality actually means. Okay, going on to the consequences. This, the Equality Trust came out of a book, which I don't know if a number of you have seen or have read, called The Spirit Level, by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett, which is actually looking at the consequences of inequality. And what they did, first of all, was just to demonstrate on this graph that the countries that we're actually looking at are all the ones up in the top right. So that as income increases, there is actually, in the poorer countries, life expectancy and so on increases. But once you get to a certain level of income, the increase in income doesn't make any difference in areas like life expectancy. And this is the key graph, which actually shows that in the advanced countries, the more unequal you are, the more a whole series of social problems you have. Now, I'm going to go through those individual social problems very, very quickly, and you're going to have to be very quick to keep up with all the slides I'm going to show you. But this is the key composite slide that puts together life expectancy, maths and literacy. You can see it all down the side. And you can see that the most equal countries, which are the one down the far end, Japan, Norway, Sweden, score best on how many of these problems they've got, or how few of these problems they've got, whereas the most unequal countries, which are up at the other end, are the worst. And the USA is virtually off the scale. And I often find it very, very difficult when I hear Even actually Al Gore, in his latest book on the future, talks about a role for America in the future as if it has some role to play, when in fact the statistics about the sort of society that America actually is are absolutely appalling. So if I just go through some of these very quickly individually. They also, as well as looking at those developed countries, they also looked at the data for American states. And American states have much more autonomy than we do here in local government, so you can actually look at differences between American states. They have different taxation systems and so on, and exactly the same thing applies there. Those American states that are most unequal have, I won't go through this in any detail, you can pick out some of the names yourself, have more and more social problems. Right, and they're not in any way, these health and social problems, related to national income per head. You can see that that is putting the advanced economies on the graph at average income per head, and there's no statistical line of correlation that you can draw. So very, very briefly, life expectancy is longer in more equal rich countries. Child well-being is better in more equal countries. Mental illness is more common in more unequal societies. Drug use is more common in more unequal countries. Infant mortality rates are higher in more unequal countries, so this goes on a long time, just keep with it. More adults are obese in more unusual rich countries, and very interesting that there was a whole big thing 2 weeks ago or so about obesity that came out in the papers, and how this national crisis that we've got on obesity did not mention the way society is organized as one of the reasons for leading to that in the debate about that. Teenage birth rates are higher, homicide rates are higher, imprisonment rates are higher, educational scores are higher in more equal rich countries. Children experience more conflict. This is to do with fighting and bullying. And interestingly enough, people often say, you know, the whole point of having this inequality is that we have more social mobility, more chance for people to get on, the American dream again. If you look at social mobility, and this is the measure of this is how far your income is different from your parents' income, basically, as to what the movement is between that. Social mobility is actually lower in more unequal countries. And people then say more unequal countries will be more innovative. People, again, will have more ideas. Not true. If you look at the number of patents there are per thousand population, again, more equal societies are more innovative. And they're also better on recycling. So this is a key one, which I think is part of the explanation about why this happens, which is that people in more unequal countries trust each other less. And I mean, that's not surprising. That's a fairly obvious conclusion if you think about it in terms of the differences that there will be in those societies. So the summary. Bigger income gaps lead to deteriorations in social relations, that's the child conflict, homicide and so on, in health issues, drug abuse, infant mortality and so on, and in a load of human capital issues. Right, and that then summarizes again that graph that we had. Very interestingly, this one very, very quickly, it sounds a rather obscure one, but the point about this graph is that if you look at infant mortality rates in England and Wales and in Sweden, Sweden being more equal a country than we are, you will find that for all class groups, all income groups, there is a benefit for being in a more equal society. So even if you're the richest, you're better off being the better off in Sweden than you are here, if you see what I mean, right? So there's actually more equality benefits everybody. It doesn't just benefit those people in the middle or at the bottom. Right, why is the question? Why is inequality leading to all these social problems? There's a lot about this in the book, and actually Richard and Kate, their book that they're writing at the moment, is more about this particular issue. Is there a mechanism? And their line is that basically in more unequal societies, we value or devalue ourselves more. So there's more superiority and inferiority, more status competition, more consumerism, more status insecurity, more worry about how we're seen and judged, and more what's called social evaluation anxiety, which are threats to how people judge us and how we feel about ourselves. And that's shown in this, which looks at Our stress hormones, and basically when our stress hormones increase, and they basically increase when we're under some sort of social evaluative threat, which is some sort of threat that we can't control. When we feel out of control in a situation and feel threatened in a situation, our stress hormones go up, and that then can lead to a number of these other issues. So that's the theory. I mean, it's a theory that still has to be tested. Some of it seems to me to be common sense, if you like. I mean, it seems to be the way the world operates and the way we feel in the world. Right, what can be done? And this is then the issue where I guess in terms of the Zeitgeist conversation that you had earlier, or the discussion there, which was about moving very radically to a very different situation, you're perhaps going to find these a rather more reformist view of how you might go about changing things. But I think that is also very important that we then talk about what our theories of social change actually are. How does change actually take place? And the sort of things we're talking about here are that there are two ways that you can tackle this. One is what is roughly called the Japanese way, which is that you actually reduce income differences before tax. And this seems to me to be part of what you would call the zeitgeist. Can we get to a situation where the view in society as a whole is that these things are unacceptable? Now, you could also say, and I think it's very interesting around the bankers and their bonuses and all the rest of it, where if you ask most people, what they get is unacceptable. But nothing very much happens about it. So some of the stuff that was being talked about earlier about the relationship between financial power and political power, I think is very important here. And we can see lots of examples of that happening. But basically, before tax, we'd like to see wage ratios obviously reduced substantially. We think part of the way of doing that is opening up companies and being more democratic and actually knowing what is going on and promoting more people from within the companies. Then obviously in the more Scandinavian model, perhaps, you have the use of taxes and benefits in order to equalize, if you like, after you might say after the damage has been done. After you have the inequality, you then use the state system in order to bring things back more equally. So to me, the important issue here is one that we need to discuss, and perhaps all need to discuss between ourselves, is that purely some sort of small reformist model, or is there some other way in which we can move? And then I think the issue about the future and how we deal with the future is actually quite interesting. Because if we go back in my lifetime, 20 or 30 years, would we have predicted the whole disability and sexuality debates, for example, that have taken place, and the complete changes in the way society views those particular issues? I'm not sure that we could have predicted it. I mean, 20 or 30 years ago, there were struggles. Well, sexuality, homosexuality and so on goes back to the 1950s, but then homosexuality law reform in the 60s and so on. But society's attitudes to those have changed. Do we know why that's happened? Is there a way in which, by taking a series of small steps, which are partly outside the system, but then getting the system to reinforce it, which is what I would argue you need to do, how far can that actually achieve change? And how does that apply across to perhaps something that is more fundamental to capitalism, which is this inequality and so on? Can we change that? Can we move that across? And very interestingly, also, I mean, I haven't mentioned, for example, the debate around women. I was very struck today that you're being talked to by a load of men. In fact, not a single woman. And I think that's perhaps indicative of the fact that although that debate is around, it hasn't moved as far as it might have done, although a lot of discussion actually in the moment around feminism and so on and what it means. So I think that there is a debate to be had about how we move from what we all will describe as dysfunctional systems, as to how we move from that to something that we can't quite predict. And to me, that is about a whole series of individual actions which involve some interaction with the legislative process, whereby they're trying to feed off each other. So finally, this is my slogans for today. Lose weight with income inequality, live longer with income equality, achieve educational success with income equality, Feel safer with income inequality. Stay out of jail with income equality. Be greener with income equality. Thank you.
Okay, so I hope you all enjoyed that, guys. As you know, we have featured the Equality Trust in many of our materials in the past, so it was really great to get them to be able to come along and speak at one of our events. One point I would just like to address that was made by Sean in that talk is the lack of women speakers on the day at ZDAY. I did address this after the talk, in which I said there were some women speakers who we did want because of the information they were going to be presenting, but unfortunately it didn't meet with their schedule. Ultimately, that's all it actually boils down to in the end, really. What information are you presenting? And it just so happens that this time round, the people who we wanted to talk at the event, or the organisations and the subjects that wanted to be covered, were covered by men. That's just the nature of how it worked out. So I just wanted to address that, and I'm sure we'll be doing a joint event with the Equality Trust at some point in the future. Speaking of those joint events, just to mention the next one before I move on to the remainder of the show, which will be me continuing to read from the First Civilisation. The next event in London will be held on Tuesday the 9th of July at the Elixir Bar in Camden with Darren DeWitt from the Centre for Nonviolent Communication. The talk I'm going to give is going to be on general semantics and a language that actually has a correlation to the physical reality in which we exist. So that's the next talk I'm going to be getting ready. So if you can make that event, it is free. Start time is at 7 p.m. Please bring as many people as you possibly can to it, and hopefully the Facebook event for that will be going up along with the meetup page in the next few days. Okay, on to the next section of the show, in which I'm going to be continuing to read from the First Civilisation, and I'm going to pick it up from page 50. So if you want to read along with me, feel free. You can get a copy of the PDF for free online through the Zeitgeist Movement website, or just by typing the First Civilisation Jaskacha into Google, and then it should come up. Okay. Statement. I don't want computers to make decisions for me. I find it interesting that so many people seem to have an irrational fear of letting computers make decisions for them. You already do. Every phone call you make, every electronic product you use, every calculation you punch into a calculator all require that a computer make a decision for you. The important thing to remember is that these decisions are not based on any kind of subjective or emotional interpretations of how something should be done. They are simply algorithmic calculations based purely on numbers and logical rules. A cell phone does not engage in a moral debate with itself before it connects you to the person you're calling. Also, consider the fact that we currently rely on computers controlling traffic lights to guide us safely through intersections without smashing into each other. In fact, if you decide to not listen to the decisions of traffic lights, you are much more likely to smash into someone than if you had followed the traffic lights' advice. The idea of computers making simple, menial decisions that ultimately keep society running is not something new. It's already happening right now. And of course, even though the system in your phone might decide how to connect your call, you are still the one who chooses to make that phone call. This is precisely why an RBE is set up to be as open to human input as possible. Even if computers are making the background decisions, it is still up to humans to make the executive controlling decisions that dictate what the computers will ultimately do. The purpose of the computers is simply to take care of all of the menial background work, while the overall course the computers take is completely under human control. Therefore, computers might run society, but humans would still run the computers. Of course, this scenario could change as computer technology advances. As computers become more powerful and intelligent, it would make sense that we would want to begin to put more and more of the decision-making power in their hands. After all, there is a very real chance that before the 21st century is over, computers will have become more intelligent than humans. In this case, it is likely that they would actually do a much better job of running society than our meagre human minds ever could. However, as of today, such a scenario is entirely speculation. For now, we would require a combination of human and computer control in order to keep society running in the most efficient way possible. And remember, humans would still be firmly in charge. Statement. What if an intelligent computer decides it wants to destroy all humans? Although the probability of such a situation is low, there is nonetheless a legitimate worry that I honestly think we need to take seriously, especially since an RBE in the near future will likely rely on some form of artificial intelligence, AI, in order to function. If a computer becomes intelligent and powerful enough, might it decide that the world would be better off without all of these pesky humans? After all, humans have succeeded in destroying much of the planet and driving numerous species to extinction. Alternatively, an advanced AI might be so intelligent and powerful that it might view humans the same way as we view ants. No one would care if a few of them got stepped on. If an advanced AI was to be created in our current capitalist society, I would have to agree with this concern. A truly intelligent being would almost certainly view humans as the plague that we are, and might try to wipe us out as a favour to the rest of the planet. Even if these AIs did have some form of compassion, they might still attempt to force us into changing our ways with threats of genocide. This situation isn't much better because it would essentially be slavery. I think it would be wise for us to consider that before we create something that might decide to destroy us in order to help the rest of the planet, we should first make ourselves into less of a threat to this planet. Take a guess as to how we might do that. It starts with R and ends with resource-based economy. If advanced AIs are created within an RBE, their opinion of us would probably be very different than if they were created in a capitalist system. Instead of being a threat to the planet, we would be just another species sharing the biosphere with all of the others. In this case, I don't think it would make much sense for an AI to want to destroy us. If anything, it would probably view us as something to be cared for and preserved, the same way we often view other animals that we deem less intelligent than ourselves. If we do not present ourselves as a threat to the planet, there is no reason any intelligent being would have to kill us. It's as simple as that. As for the concern that AI might view us the same way we view ants, and therefore not even care about the damage it does to us while it goes about its super intelligent work, I don't think this is very likely. A creature of advanced intelligence is able to understand that certain organisms are aware of their own mortality and evolved enough to sense things like fear and pain. Furthermore, one quick look at the evolution of animal intelligence seems to show us that as intellect increases, so does emotional intelligence. Only the most intelligent creatures on the planet mourn their dead, care for their sick, and treat their injured. It makes sense that something that is more intelligent than a human would actually be more likely to care for other beings than we would. Therefore, if anything, I think an advanced AI without any reason to kill us would do a much better job of taking care of us than we would. In the same way that a human can drastically improve the standard of living of their pet compared to how that animal would live if it were on its own, an AI would probably do a much better job of raising us than we would be able to do on our own. The major difference is that we are aware enough to be conscious of this improvement, and intelligent enough to be able to make the best of it. Of course, this all assumes that humans do nothing to improve our own capabilities. The transhumanist movement encourages us to use technology to move beyond our own biological limits and therefore try to remain equal to our AI creations. It is not in the scope of this book to try and dissect the entire transhuman debate, so I'll just leave the topic here. but it's certainly worth considering the possibility that before this century is out, the differences between a human intelligence and an AI will be extremely minor, if they exist at all. That being said, we should also ensure that we treat our AIs the same way that we would want to be treated. For example, there would be no point in forcing an advanced AI to perform repetitive labour tasks that could be done just as well by a less aware computer. It would probably get bored, just like any human would get bored. We have to remember that anything as intelligent as a human would know the difference between helping us out and being enslaved by us. If we mistreat our AIs, they might begin to mistreat us. And by mistreat, I of course mean that they might want to obliterate us. That's why it would make sense to have truly intelligent AIs only performing tasks that require creative thinking, so that they would be able to fully enjoy their consciousness as much as their human creators do. Mundane labour tasks, on the other hand, should always be left in the care of computers that are not intelligent enough to actually think, since they are essentially performing slave labour. There is no reason that any sapient creature, artificial or natural, should have to sacrifice its freedom for any other sapient creature. If we create an intelligent being only to consign it to slavery, I would say that it has every right to overthrow its dictatorial masters. Question: if everyone is taken care of and we have advanced medical technology available to every person, won't that cause overpopulation of the planet? Aren't there too many humans already? If we create a society in which everyone is taken care of and no one is starving to death, wouldn't we quickly overpopulate the planet? I'm not even going to touch on the moral implications of a society in which people starving to death can be justified as a positive thing, but I think you can imagine what my stance on that is. As for the query itself, the simple answer is no. Population growth is highest in developing countries where technological advancement is low. In such societies, population growth is actually inverse to standard of living. The worse lives people are living, the faster the population grows. This might sound counterintuitive, but we have to keep in mind that in a country with low technological development, human labour is a much more valuable commodity. Families need to be large because that is the only way there will be enough human power to keep a low-tech society running. Once a society reaches a certain state of technological advancement and a sufficient standard of living, population growth actually begins to slow down substantially. If we extrapolate this trend to an RBE, we can see right away that fears of overpopulation are unfounded. This is a society that would be even more technologically advanced and have an even higher standard of living than the most developed nations of today, where population growth is already quite slow. Therefore, it would make sense that population growth in an RBE would be even lower than in today's developed nations. As for the assertion that there are already too many humans, this is only from the perspective of a monetary system. There are more than enough resources for every human on the planet, plus at least several billion more. We just happen to be stuck in a system that cannot distribute those resources in a rational manner. In short, what might subjectively be seen as overpopulation is in actuality just a failure of our current system to make optimal use of the staggering abundance of resources available to our species. We have plenty of open land for settlements, but our current system forces most of us into cities so we can be in close proximity to our jobs, where huge amounts of potentially useful space is occupied by parking lots and the like, thus creating unnecessary overcrowding. We now have the technological capability to produce food with only a fraction of the land and resources required by primitive agricultural technologies, along with an entire atmosphere's worth of clean water. We have the ability to provide abundant goods and services using entirely clean energy sources through a system that requires very little human labour of any kind. Overpopulation is entirely dependent upon the properties of the system we are observing, and clearly our present system does not possess the properties necessary to manage our current and future population, despite the fact that it is technically feasible. Of course, what if human settlements were not confined to land? What if we were able to expand whole cities onto the ocean, which covers the majority of our planet? Wouldn't that vastly increase the space accessible to us, as well as make the wealth of resources in the ocean available to us? Once again, I'll leave you in suspense until the next section. Question: what about precious or rare materials? How do we prioritize their use? This is basically a question of superficiality versus practicality. For example, let's look at a rare material such as gold. For much of recent history, humans have enjoyed decorating things in gold as a sign of wealth or status. Recently, we also discovered that gold is an excellent conductor of electricity, so we started using it in our electronics. When it comes to the question of superficiality versus practicality, practicality would always be prioritized in an RBE. After all, what's the point in decorating things with material that indicates wealth or status if these terms are no longer relevant? As for the physical appearance of gold, there are numerous substances that could be used to mimic its colour and shine to an extent, and people could simply use these less rare materials for decorative purposes. So in the case of gold, it would make practical sense that priority would always be given to its use in electronics and the like. However, there is always the possibility that sufficient scientific research into the properties of materials might allow us to find a suitable substitute or artificially mimic its properties. Therefore, the allocation of rare or precious materials would ultimately be prioritized to scientific research if they didn't have any other practical use. In doing so, we would increase the chances that we could find a way to accomplish our practical goals without any use of any rare materials, and allow people to enjoy the superficial appearance of some rare material without actually having to expend these highly limited resources. Once again, this might raise the concern that by prioritizing the use of rare materials to research or electronics, we would be creating a new kind of elitism, where scientists and engineers have access to materials and the rest of society does not. And once again, this concern is unfounded. Anyone is free to contribute to scientific research or engineering by taking advantage of the free education system. And most importantly, we have to remember that the precious materials allocated to research and electronics would be used to perform experiments or build computer chips and the like. It's highly unlikely that you would see any scientists making obnoxiously large gold chains and flaunting their status as researchers. I think it's funny that I would even need to make that last statement, but I'd rather play it safe than leave some people worried. So to summarize, the usage of precious or rare materials would be prioritized to the creation of practically useful goods and to the scientific research involved in overcoming the need for their usage at all. Superficial and decorative needs would be filled by using less rare materials, since there is literally nothing to gain by displaying one's ability to afford rare materials in an RBE. Question: what would happen to the entertainment industry? What about movies and video games? As I've stated a few times now, some form of relaxation is required for the production of a healthy human being. Therefore, some form of entertainment will probably always remain in society. However, with the addictions built into us for certain forms of entertainment, there would be a massive decrease in the almost constant saturation of entertainment that distracts us today. With the freedom to pursue so many different activities, time spent purely on entertainment for the sake of entertainment would likely decrease substantially. Nonetheless, some forms of entertainment would probably remain for the foreseeable future. Something similar to television shows would likely still exist via video uploading websites, which have already begun to replace television for many people who regularly access the internet. The recent flood of smartphone applications has shown us that simple games have the ability to provide a huge amount of entertainment despite being well within the reach of a single person or small group to make. These kind of open-sourced entertainments will likely become the dominant forms of pure entertainment in an RBE. However, thanks to the Global Skills Database, the idea of enough people pulling together to make more complicated video games, movies and alike is certainly not impossible. Let's also keep in mind that an RBE would have a vibrant arts community that would also provide a wealth of entertainment in addition to teaching lessons and raising consciousness as art tends to do. Theatre, music, literature, and various other forms of artistic expression would not only exist, but they would be able to truly flourish. Basically, the need for entertainment in this kind of society would be so low that there would be no reason to waste vast amounts of resources on a spectacle that does nothing but keep people's minds occupied. Basically, the need for entertainment in this kind of society would be so low that there would be no reason to waste vast amounts of resources on a spectacle that does nothing but keep people's minds occupied, as is the case today. As long as the internet or some equivalent remains, I imagine that humans will have no difficulty in finding ways to keep entertained on the rare occasion it is needed. Of course, if full immersion virtual reality becomes readily available, as it almost certainly would in a technologically advanced society, this would make all other forms of pure entertainment obsolete anyways. So in summary, an RBE is a society in which there is almost no need for the incredibly wasteful forms of entertainment which saturate our senses and continually distract us from more important things today. What entertainment remains will largely be from the arts community or from the ever-evolving patchwork of the internet, fueled entirely through open source contributions. Question: what about professional sports? The concept of professional sports is an extremely recent development for our species. For the majority of our history, the purpose of sports was to provide a leisure activity, encourage physical fitness, and allow for social interaction, rather than to act as the money-making distraction that it is today. In an RBE, it would make sense that people would go back to playing sports for fun, rather than worrying as much about the spectacle of the event. Over time, recreational leagues of various skill levels would likely form through the use of the Global Skills Database, which would also be an ideal platform for the formation and management of teams. This means that high-level sports would probably not disappear completely, although they might become rarer. You might think that, given all of the evidence I've offered against competition, I would be opposed to the idea of competition in any form. However, with the incredibly high stress involved in competing for money, or the prospect of money in the future, recreational competition is significantly less likely to carry the negative behavioural side effects of official competition. In addition, playing sports has been shown to have a positive effect on emotional well-being. In the end, a sport is just a game, and it would likely be treated as such. People could finally stop worrying about their sports career and just get back to having fun. And as the ultimate bonus, never again would a child need to suffer from the trauma of hockey dad effect. Question: what about religion? You never really mentioned it at all. Religion. That touchiest of subjects, where every sentence must be carefully crafted in order to avoid offending people over the most trivial of matters. What would happen to religion in an RBE? Well, this would be a society built on the principles of science and logic. It would be run in a secular manner, and therefore religion would receive no special treatment for good or ill. As with other human enterprises, the Global Knowledge Database would contain information pertaining to the various religions and mythologies of the world. Anyone who wanted to learn about them could do so. There would be no restrictions on religious knowledge, and all humans would be free to believe in whatever they want to believe. However, in a society where practically everyone is educated and information of all kinds is freely available, it seems unlikely that the lure of traditional religion would be very strong. Don't get me wrong, there would not be any active attempt to rid the world of religion. It would simply be a natural shift in people's ideas and worldviews. So the practice of learning and questioning one's beliefs becomes more and more acceptable. Nonetheless, I predict that within even just a few generations of an RBE's inception, traditional religious believers would likely become a minority of the population, being replaced by adherents to other forms of spirituality and philosophy. Of course, we must also be open to the possibility that an enlightened society might actually discover that some religion was right all along. However, I think the first scenario is significantly more likely. Question: what would we do with all the old cities? Since an RBE requires the creation of almost entirely new infrastructure, it would not make sense to try and renovate the old cities. It would be much more efficient to simply construct entirely new ones. So what would we do with all of the old cities? At first we would probably just leave them there. During the early stages of the transition to an RBE, many people would probably still be living within the old cities. However, if the vast majority of humans decide to make the switch to an RBE, these cities would probably be abandoned initially. Over time, many of the old cities would likely be recycled and salvaged for resources, assuming there are no residents remaining. There would also be surveys to determine which historic sites and districts would be left standing, essentially as museum towns, so that future generations would still be able to see some of the marvels of our architecture and culture. However, over the course of a few centuries, the majority of today's cities would likely be recycled and replaced with newer ones. With the prospect of building cities on the ocean, foreshadowing, the need for the destruction of the old cities might be held off for quite some time. But eventually, much of our old civilization would be replaced. As long as we are able to preserve some monuments and cities, we would never lose touch with our past, and hopefully always be reminded about the mistakes we've made, so that they will never be repeated. And the journey continues. We've spent this chapter discussing some of the most common objections, concerns and curiosities that I've come across in regards to an RBE. Hopefully, I've now proven that this idea is not only worth pursuing, but that there is also little, if nothing, to fear from this evolution. The majority of objections against an RBE seem to be based on superficial misunderstanding and the socially damaging programming that we have all been subjected to in contemporary society. We've seen what an RBE might look like, as well as addressed some concerns that people might have about this system. Now we will delve into the most important step in determining the success or failure of this system, putting it to the test. And I'm going to stop reading there at page 56. We're going to pick it up at page 57 and section 3, entitled "This is the Test." By the way, I should just mention that it is my intention to make an audio book out of all of these readings that I've been doing for the radio show. I have been recording them, and so it's just a case of compiling them when I'm finished, and then I will be releasing that online through several different channels for free, so that people can just pick it up and listen to it in one go, rather than fishing around in the radio shows for it. So that's just about it from me for today, guys. Please bear in mind that the Zeitgeist Media Festival is coming up, so do start to give some thought to organising your event and promoting that now, because music and art and the power of the aesthetic is a great way of reaching people, because humans are not just machines. We do have emotions that come into play in forming our worldview and our purpose in life. So that's why we have a media festival, and that's why I'm going to close today's show with a song from a very good friend of mine who goes by the name of Chris Sagan, which is not his real name, but then if you take a look at the surname he's using, I think you should get a pretty fair idea of where his views are at. And I have been doing a lot of recording with him in my home studio. He's a member of the Zeitgeist Movement and a singer-songwriter who dedicates his lyrical content towards the direction we propose in his material. So I'm going to include a song by him now entitled "Long Way to Go," which is exactly what we have, guys. We do have a long way to go before we can say we have truly reached, as Martin Luther King would call it, the promised land. But hey, Don't be too despondent about it. Just keep your heads up and keep your integrity. Keep doing what you do and have fun whilst you're doing it. Thanks very much for listening, guys. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.